Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. The way we view people, places, and events is a function of perspective, whether it's geographical location, angle, or even altitude. The truth of this is dramatized in Remains to be Seen, a collection of aerial photographs and essays by Travis Fox, the director of visual journalism at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, and co-author Philip Kennicott. In dozens of photographs taken with a drone camera, he offers a rare perspective on former industrial, commercial, residential, and natural sites across the country. And the pictures tell dramatic stories about how these sites have been affected by economic, environmental, and social change. Remains to be Seen is published by Daylight Books. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Travis, when and why did you develop an interest in drone photography?
Well, I've been a journalist, a visual journalist, for a couple decades now, and I feel like, when I was out with the video camera, there was always a reason to get a high perspective. Normally, it's just an establishing shot, but almost on every project, I remember thinking, oh, I need to get up high, right? I need to get on the top of my rental car to get an overall shot, or could we, how could we get to the top of that building to get an overall view of this community that we're doing a story on? And so that was kind of a constant need, not an important need, not an overarching need, but a constant need. And when drone technology developed, I quickly put those two and two together. I said, here's a tool that will fix a problem that I've been having, from climbing on rental cars or climbing up ladders, that sort of a thing. And so I got the drone, and it fulfilled that need. And, I started, this was 6 or 7 years ago. And I, just started playing with it, seeing what's possible. I was interested in kind of pushing the limits of what was possible. And slowly, over years and years of using the drone, both for films and as still photography, I kind of came upon this project at the end of it.
Where did the idea for this book come from?
So the idea is the culmination of my work over the past several years with the drone. So I was instantly drawn to these places, these kind of threshold spaces, these liminal spaces, spaces that are on the cusp of changing, right? And seeing that change in the physical form is what interests me. And it's easier to see that from above. So one of the first photographs I did that's in the book is of a Borscht Belt resort in the Catskills in upstate New York that has long been abandoned. And nature is slowly taking over this resort in Fallsburg, New York. And when you're on the ground, it just looks like regular ruins, right? We've seen them, we drive past them. But from the ground, you see it from a completely different perspective. And you can see how the nature is overtaking these ruins. And they fuse together in ways that you simply can't see from the ground. And so I was fascinated by this from a kind of an aesthetic point of view. And so I used that idea of fusion, of aesthetic fusion. And I thought about what other places could I take that way of shooting, and what else could I see that you can't see from the ground?
How did you decide which of these sites you wanted to photograph? You said there are sites in the midst of change. How did you pick the sites?
So there's lots of different ways, lots of different reasons why I picked these sites. First of all is, kind of journalistic reporting, right? I studied about the issues that I was interested in, and I discovered the places that represented these issues. So that was kind of the first step, and that's done like any other reporting, reading books, making phone calls, searches, that sort of thing. And then the next step was, which of these places was possible, both logistically and legally. So as a drone pilot, I'm governed by the FAA rules that very severely limit where you can fly a drone and how you can fly a drone, okay? So a lot of the places that I wanted to go, I couldn't go because they were simply off limits per FAA regulations. So that was the next step. Then the third step was looking logistically at Google Earth. So I used another kind of high-tech tool. So I used the drone for the photographs, but I used Google Earth very intently to figure out how to fly, right? And so with Google Earth, you have high resolution satellite photos. So I can say, okay, I can start to get a sense of what it looks like from above, the beginnings, but I can also see, okay, well, here's where I could park the car. Here's where I could launch from, knowing that I have limited range, knowing that I've limited, flight operations per FAA rules, then I can kind of organize my flight ahead of time using Google Earth. And without that tool, this project wouldn't have been possible either. It's such a crucial step.
You talk about the issues that you wanted to dramatize through the photographs that you took. Your co-author writes that the images in the book, quote, reveal the archaeological remains of forces that shaped American life during the last century. Let's talk about some of the photographs that dramatize some of these forces. And one of the forces was the flourishing and the decline of the industrial economy.
Right. So I spent a lot of time in the Rust Belt from Cleveland to Pittsburgh. And I was, like the Borscht Belt Resort, I was kind of fascinated with those spaces. A lot of reporting has happened in these spaces. A lot has been done. A lot of visual reporting has been done. So I wanted to see the physical effects. And so, an obvious first step, and this is how the book starts off, are the old factories, right? So in Youngstown, I photographed the largest, at the time when it was built, the largest steel mill in the world, right? And what remains of it today, which is very little. But I also looked at how this change affected the communities that we're in. So I looked at empty lots. I've looked at the loss of businesses in that part of Ohio, loss of an amusement park, and I was fascinated by with the change in population, the change in the industrial, how it affect leisure, and so this. These images of the abandoned amusement park, to me, really communicated this loss, maybe more so than a crumbling factory, right, which we've seen before. But the amusement parks we've seen less of. So I like that kind of juxtaposition between like amusement, fun, and abandonment.
The growth of the suburbs was another theme. And I recall looking at the steeple of a Roman Catholic church in Pittsburgh. Why did you choose that site?
So I would say that fits in with kind of the change in industrial America that was in Pittsburgh. That's the Rust Belt. That's a change in a community. That's a community that was largely populated by steel workers. The steel mills in that area of Pittsburgh are largely gone, and so are the Roman Catholic workers, immigrants that came over and founded that church and built that church. And it's a beautiful church. It's on the brink of, it's at that threshold of going one way or the other. It's either going to fall down or be torn down, or it's going to be preserved.
And if the jobs left, the people left, presumably some of them moved to other cities, some of them moved to suburbs. And you see a lot of churches in urban places that no longer have closed down because the people have moved away.
This is a neighborhood that's still populated. It's just not populated with Roman Catholics.
Okay.
That go to this church. So it's a change. It's not a change for the worse or a change for the better, or some of my photographs would indicate a change for the better, for the worse. But in this instance, that church, that's a change in population.
But Pittsburgh overall has lost a lot of people, hasn't it, in recent decades?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. As all Rust Belt cities, for sure.
Another force that your co-author talked about was the post-war population boom and the leisure economy.
Yeah, so that fits into that. That fits into this, to where I mentioned in the Borscht Belt. That was a change. That was a way of life for mostly Jewish New Yorkers from the city, go up to these resorts for a couple generations, and that culture is gone, is largely vanished. But the physical remnants of that culture remain. And so I'm not Jewish. I am a New Yorker. But that culture, as a New Yorker, I'm very familiar with it. It's part of kind of our collective culture within New York, and seeing these remnants of that culture I think are worth documenting and worth exploring, because in another generation there won't be any physical remnants of that left.
Certainly, environmental neglect was a force that was captured in some of your photographs.
For sure. And again, this was finding ways to photograph these different, a lot of visual journalism, visual documentary work has been done on climate change and on change of environment. My challenge using this new tool was how to tell the story in a way, show my audience in a way that was different. And so, yeah, I did work in Owens Lake in California, in the Chesapeake Bay, sea level rise and what that's done to some of the trees near the Chesapeake Bay, which is kind of the first examples of the effects of sea level change. And photographing directly from above in Owens Lake gives you the sense of these colors, which are a reminder of the heavy metals and the other elements that were part of this water that has since dried up. And it allows you to see it in a way that you never see it from the ground. From the ground, it looks insignificant, right? From above, it's incredible amount of color. And ditto with the Chesapeake Bay, you can see the dead trees in this case juxtaposed to the water below it, which you simply can't see from the ground.
Tell me about the process of photographing these sites. Do you use film? Did you use a digital camera? I gather that a drone can only take pictures, a camera on a drone can only take pictures for 20 minutes. So you can't really snap pictures of specific objects. So do you just sort of take pictures in general and then at the end you see what you got? What was the process like?
So the process is pretty frenetic. It doesn't, the pictures, some of the pictures are quiet and purposeful, and they appear kind of well composed and square. It looked like, I guess a lot of thought and effort did go into them, but the moment they're photographed, it's kind of a frenetic sprint. So the batteries last for 20 minutes before you have to bring the drone back. And you have to constantly pay attention to your surroundings. So I'm flying the drone with the remote control. I have a screen on that remote control so I can see what the camera sees. Okay, so I line up the image, but the drone never stays 100% stable, right? It moves a bit because of wind. And so I'm thinking about the composition of the photos, which is a certain part of my brain, but I'm also thinking about helicopters, right? Because I have to avoid all helicopters or small airplanes. I'm worried about tree branches or power lines. I'm worried about the noise that this loud machine makes in very quiet communities and what the population of those communities might think, right? And so in some ways it's a challenge for me to do this because it's kind of two different sides of my brain. One side wants to think about composition and the aesthetics and wants to, get comfortable in that space. And the other one is like constantly panicking and like, okay, what's the next hurdle? How much do I have left? What am I going to photograph? And how can I get back without crashing, right? The risk of these drones, and this is why the FAA rules are so stringent, is because if this falls from the ground at 400 feet or at 200 feet for that matter, it'll kill someone, okay? It has that much weight. Even if it falls on a car with someone in it, it would kill them at 400 feet, right? It has that much power falling from the sky. And so the responsibility to fly safely is very real. And that, for me, like that kind of stresses me out, right? And it's very different from when I'm on the ground with the camera and I don't have those concerns.
So obviously, we've talked about how high above, and how high did you go? How high with the?
So the absolute limit, is 400 feet above ground level. So you can't go any higher than that. And often in certain airspaces, you're limited to 200 feet or 100 feet.
Photographers have always talked about the relative cost and the relative quality of different cameras. How much does a drone cost?
They vary. You can get they vary from, several $100s, for a decent entry-level drone, up to, several tens of thousands of dollars, right? Depending on what kind of camera you put on it. So, you know, the drones, you can put on any sort of great cinema camera that you're using to film movies, or really high-end, any sort of high-end camera you can put on a drone. And so, yeah, a couple hundred to several tens of thousands.
Each photograph, I noticed that each photograph in the book is labeled only with the city and the state where it was taken. Other than that, one has no idea. You don't tell, otherwise you don't tell the reader what you're taking a picture of. And you don't find that out until later. The captions come later in the book. Was that intentional? I mean, did you want the reader to say, oh, hey, this is an interesting picture, and try to figure out what it was?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. These images are, they're in some ways simple in their composition, because shooting direct from above directly down simplifies a landscape, but it's also complex. It messes with your mind. We're not used to seeing the world like that. And so my purpose in this project and all my previous projects have been to kind of challenge the viewer into spending more time with the image and examining the image. I don't want to instantly say, this is a X. I want you to think about the image, right? And say, okay, well, now I see this and now I see that. Because the more time you spend with the image, the more you'll consider the image, the aesthetics of the image, which is one thing, but more importantly, the more time you'll consider the story behind the image, okay? So what does this mean? What does this mean that this culture is gone? What does it mean that I can see this division between these houses in this red line neighborhood, right? And so it's I want the viewer to be challenged both aesthetically and deeper. So yeah, that's all done on purpose.
And that you talk about the aesthetics of some of the photographs, because some of them look like abstract paintings or mixed media pieces. Something that you might see hanging in a museum.
Yeah, and so I think the as a photographer, as a journalist and also as a photographer, I'm kind of interested in both. So I'm interested in the aesthetics and what you can do with the aesthetics, with the drone that you can't do from a terrestrial camera, right? And so, some of the colors in the Owens Lake series, is kind of originally appealed to me from an aesthetic point of view, right? But as a journalist, that's not good enough, right? As a photojournalist, we're not interested in pretty pictures. We're interested, but we're not interested in publishing a book about pretty pictures. I'm not, at least. And so, I did a lot of those types of aesthetic photographs that are not in the book, right? They might be on the walls of my friends' apartments, and my parents have them and that sort of thing. So what I'm really interested is dabbling with the aesthetics, but taking it a step farther and examining what's on the ground.
You talked about the different perspective that you get from seeing something high above. Certainly, Route 66 in California, in your photograph, looks nothing like the romantic highway that I remember from the television show of the I guess it was the 1960s. And the Salton Sea in California, which I know was the title of at least one novel, is not recognizable even as a body of water, in your photograph. And at the same time, Baltimore, Maryland, which was one known for its distinctive looking row houses, which I always thought were pretty hideous looking. Now a lot of them are being demolished. Was there anything, when you looked at the photographs, were there things that really surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, in all of those instances, I was seeking out, I was familiar with the history of those places that you mentioned. And I was specifically seeking out, and I knew about the current change in those places, right? And I was specifically seeking out examples of that. Okay, so in the case of the Salton Sea, it's a fascinating place. It's a sea by mistake, essentially. But in the 60s, it was quite a glamorous resort. But it has been in steady decline since then, and it's drying up quite quickly, to the point where it might be gone, right, at some point. And so it's in this in-between stage. And so I was specifically looking, again, through that process, through research, journalistic research, Google Earth research, and then finally finding those examples, driving around the Salton Sea with a list from Google Earth of places that I wanted to photograph that would represent that. And so it was the same way in Baltimore, right? It was Baltimore, this was part of a project that I did the year before that in Photoville called The Scars of Racism. A large part of this project is in the book, remains to be seen. And so this was an example of kind of the effects of redlining, right? And so I knew that this happened in Baltimore. I mean, this is well reported at this stage, but I wanted to find specific examples in the neighborhoods that would illustrate that point, that would work given the limitations of the drone. And so all those examples you cited were well thought out and planned weeks in advance.
In his book, Democracy in America, written back in 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote something like this. He basically said, Americans tend to build these great edifices and then they tear them down, not that long afterwards. Do you think your photographs, the photographs in this book, say anything about American values?
I think I want the viewers to think about history, think about how history becomes history, how our culture changes, right? How our culture is designed, how it comes about, and how it changes. And I think photographing these threshold moments, this liminal space, gets to that. And I think you can come to a variety of conclusions based on the specific regions that I worked on and the specific cases that I worked on. But overall, I want the viewer to question maybe a lot of things that have been assumed in the past.
There are no photographs of New York City in the book. Is it even legal to fly a drone in the city?
So New York City is an interesting place for drones. So technically, per local law, drones are forbidden. It's a law that's from 1948. So it's a pre-drone law, but it restricts any aircraft other than those that use Port Authority airports is how it's worded. So drone pilots have been cited using this law. And generally, it's more difficult, even without this law, it's harder to fly in New York City because the FAA laws restrict you from flying over people or moving cars. And the places
and there are people in cars everywhere in New York City, right?
There are, right? And so that makes it really difficult. There are a couple places in Queens, Brooklyn and Staten Island designated fields for model aircraft that you're allowed to fly drones. But outside of those areas, drones are generally prohibited.
So at the CUNY Journalism School, you teach a course in drone photography. What kinds of things are your students photographing?
So the main thrust of that course is to pass the FAA exam to become a drone pilot, to be a licensed drone pilot, which you must be in order to be a drone journalist, right? In order to fly legally anywhere in the country. So the main 8 of the 10 weeks of that course are dedicated to getting that pilot certification at the end of it. We do also cover how to fly a drone, and we go out to one of those designated areas. We go to Calvert Vaux Park in Brooklyn to fly where we can fly legally. But the actual mechanics of flying a drone drones are amazingly easy to fly for beginners or for folks like myself. The hard part is understanding the regulations, understanding where, when, how to fly. Unfortunately,
we're out of time. I'd like to thank Travis Fox, the Director of Visual Journalism at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism and the co-author of Remains to be Seen, for joining me today. Published by Daylight Books, the book can be found online and in bookstores. And to learn about our upcoming shows, be sure to follow us on Twitter at 1-to-1 CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.